Hello, and welcome to the Vanier Woodshop. I'm Mr. Dakinovich, and today we're going to talk about our bandsaw. This big machine right here is our bandsaw. We also have a smaller bandsaw that I'll show you later. But the parts of the bandsaw are, we have a nice big table, we have our guard, which looks like this, our blade, which is behind the guard, which we can adjust this up and down. We have our on-off switch, and down below we have our brake, which I'll show you later. The reason that this is called a bandsaw is because it's one big continuous band. So if we open up the window, we can see that there's a band that spins around on these two wheels. There's one underneath and one above, and as it spins, it cuts. This one happens to be 142 inches long. Not that that matters, that's not on the test. So, the most important thing to talk about when using the bandsaw, you always want to have your safety glasses on. Hearing protection is recommended, not required on this machine, but you definitely need to have safety glasses on. So when we talk about the bandsaw, there's different things that we need to talk about. When we're making a cut, we want to have our cut drawn on our material. If we're doing a cut that's really has a tight radius, we want to have something called relief cuts. So, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's first talk about just making a cut. So, I'm going to use a Sharpie. Normally, we only ever use pencils on wood, but so that you can see it on the camera, I'm going to make a mark. I want to cut the end of this board off just like this. So, before I start, we're going to look at a few different things. I want to set my guard, which is this. There's a big silver handle on the back which allows me to move it up and down. We don't want to just twist it because the guard will fall and it could damage our throat plate insert, which is this little guy right here. But I want to set my blade or my guard so that it is about 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch above the stock that I'm going to cut. So in this case, with this material, that would look like somewhere in there. That's even a little bit low, but that's okay. Numbers can be hard to remember, and there's numbers everywhere. On the test, you're definitely going to talk about numbers. In real life, when you're using this machine, yes, 5 millimeters or 1/4 inch, but the easier way that I remember it is, I want to set my blade guard to about 1/2 finger above my material. Why 1/2 finger? Because you can't fit a whole finger through a 1/2 finger gap, which will prevent me from actually cutting my fingers in this way. Now, we can talk about this silver insert here. I like to call it the circle of death. You never want your fingers close to it. You never want your hands closer than 5 centimeters or 2 inches from the blade at any point. So that's basically in this circle. And we don't want to run our fingers straight towards the blade as we're cutting down, because if we slip, we could hit the blade. So we always have our hands so that they're staggered to either side of the blade. Now, in this case, I'm going to cut this piece, and I'm going to cut from the side. My fingers are going to be well away. We're going to cut that end off. It's going to work really well. So let's do that cut. Then we'll talk about when we need relief cuts. So I've got my power on and my power off. Turn it on. Let my saw wind up. And this cut is very simple. I'm just going to cut straight across. I'm going to shut this off. I'm going to apply the brake, which will slow it down. I'm never going to reach into that circle of death. I'm going to use a piece of scrap that I can find to push that piece out. I'll take my piece and I'll throw it in the scrap bin. So if I now had to cut something that was a really sharp corner. So if I was cutting a circle that had this weird little side on it, my blade could not make it around here without binding or causing the machine distress. So what I'm going to do is something called relief cuts. A relief cut is a series of cuts where we come in from the edge towards our curve, but never actually touch the curve. So what I'm going to do is show you 3 relief cuts that are good, one that's not good, and one that goes too far, or one that's not far enough and one that's too far. So we're going to turn our machine back on. We're going to do these relief cuts. So if we look at our board, we now have one really nice cut. We have one that goes way past our line, which is too far. We have one that doesn't come near close enough. And then we have two more that are right. So now we're going to try and make this cut around. So we're going to start on this side, and we're going to cut around. And these pieces, as we get to them, will fall away, allowing the blade to move underneath. So as you can see, my pieces are falling away. So now you can see I was able to make that. You noticed I had to go back and make a couple more relief cuts. That's okay. If you get to a point where you're cutting and it's not falling, or you could hear the saw change pitch there, I just pulled back out of the cut and cut some extra relief cuts. The one thing you want to make sure you don't do is pull out of a long curved cut backwards. The saw is really, really great, and I'm going to actually shut it off right now with my emergency stop. So now I know I can't turn it on. So I can lift this blade so I can see how much blade I can expose. As you can see, this would be crazy dangerous to try and cut this like that. But if I'm pushing into it, we have a bearing right here that stops the saw blade from moving back. But we have nothing when we're pulling forward, and that blade can move a long ways forward. If it was running and I was trying to back out of a long cut, I would actually end up pulling the blade right off the wheel on the top. Not the end of the world, but we would have to reset the saw. So we're going to talk about how to do that really quick. So I'm going to reset my guard height, turn my power back on so that I can turn that on. So if I was cutting a long cut, and I needed to remove this section, so I'll put some X's to show that this is the bad area that I want to get rid of. So if I needed to remove this, I would plan my work so that my cuts were done in the right sequence. So I would first cut this short cut, because I could easily back out, and second I would cut the long cut, and then it would just fall away. So I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So I cut the short cut first, back out, and then I can cut my long cut. And now that piece perfectly falls away. I have no risk of pulling the blade off of the wheel in the top. The next things we're going to talk about, again, I know I didn't mention this at the beginning, but no baggy sleeves, no dangly things hanging from our neck, long hair tied back, all of those things. The next thing we want to talk about is cutting something called round stock or dowel. So if I have the round stock and I'm trying to cut this, so I would lift my guard. But if I'm just trying to cut this, it's going to want to grab and spin. So I use something called this one's labeled a lathe spur cut jig. That's not what it's used for anymore. This is our round stock, so I would have to, again, set my guard up a little bit higher. We want to make sure that when we're doing this, we're aware that there's a lot of blade exposed. But I could now cut underneath this, and I'm just going to readjust this so that it's right. So now I could cut this piece, and I could turn that on, and I would push here, and it would easily cut off the end. So instead of only having one contact point with the table and one with my hand where it could slip out easily, now I've given myself 2 contact points, and a third on the top so it doesn't spin quite as easily out of my hand. If the blade on the machine breaks, which does happen from time to time, there's only one spot that the blade is actually exposed. So the blade can't fly out anywhere up here. It can't fly out anywhere over here. The only spot where our blade is actually open is right here, this one spot. So you never want to stand to the right when somebody's cutting, and you never want to cut to the right. If ever this blade breaks, this is where the blade will exit the machine if it does. So we want to make sure that that's there. That's another reason we keep our guard as low as possible, and it's a big reason why you don't stand to the right of our machine. We always want to use light pressure when we're pushing material through. You don't want to push it through as fast as you can for a couple reasons. It's really hard on the machine, but the more important reason to you is that it makes your project look really junky because it gives you a really ugly finish with really rough. So the last thing I want to demo and talk about, and this is where the live demo is way more fun than the actual video demo, but in the shop we have bandsaws in 3 main different places. One, of course, being the wood shop. We are in the Vandy wood shop. There's a bandsaw here, so we have them. We also have them across the hall in the metal shop. The third place, and this is usually where I get students to tell me, where's the third place we find bandsaws? But there's no one here to tell me, so I'm going to tell you. The third place that bandsaws are often found is a butcher shop. The reason why, and the reason that they have them, is because bandsaws cut meat really well, or animals. And like animals, we're made of skin and bones and flesh. And bandsaws cut that very, very well. So the argument that I always make as to why we make sure that we walk, or we let the saw stop before we walk away, is that if somebody came up and noticed that there was some debris on here and went to brush it around, right now it's really quiet in the shop. But when all the machines are running and the dust extraction is running, you don't always hear the bandsaw because it's actually quite quiet in the grand scheme of things. So you might not notice that this blade is stopped. Right now we can see it. But if it was spinning and you weren't paying attention and you came to brush something off, it's possible you could actually brush and cut your fingers. So I always ask kids or students, how many fingers do you think this saw would cut through even if it wasn't powered? And we get guesses everywhere from 3 to 1 to it wouldn't cut all the way through. So I want to demo that. We're going to argue that this piece of wood, which is about 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter, is roughly the same size as my index finger. I would argue that this is actually stronger than my index finger because it's all solid. There's no flesh, there's no bone, or there's no flesh in it. So I'm going to turn the saw on, I'm going to let it run to full speed, I'm going to shut it off, I'm not going to apply the brake, and I'm going to see if I was able to cut off a finger. So let's see how that works. And this is the demo of why we want to make sure we always shut machines off. So my saw is running full speed. So that was 23 and a half of my fingers that I was able to cut through before the machine stopped. So it's very easy to see with that demo that if this machine was running, you didn't shut it off, your friend walked up to brush off this debris, didn't notice it was running. If they swept off with their hand, it would easily remove all 4 of their fingers and maybe their thumb if they were super unlucky. But we want to make sure that when you turn this machine on, you always let the machine come to a complete stop. Use the brake. Our small bandsaw doesn't have a brake. I'm going to now point out where the brake is. So our brake is right down here. It simply looks like a little pedal on a car. You push it down. It applies a little wood block to the bottom. It slows the speed. And then when you're done, you just click it off and it's out of the way. That's all there is to the bandsaw. Again, I will end almost every video like this. If there's a cut that you need to make that you're at all feeling uncomfortable or worried or you're unsure or you feel like you don't have enough information, you need to ask me, and I will happily show you the bandsaw in its entirety. I'll work with you one-on-one, and we'll make sure that you understand this machine before you use it to make any cuts. Thanks for watching.